Hello. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Take a moment to get comfortable. Adjust your pillow. Pull up your blanket. Find that position where your body can just settle. There's no rush. We have all the time in the world. Tonight, we're going to talk about the QWERTY keyboard. Yes, QWERTY. Those keys arranged in that particular order. QWERTY. The letters you've typed countless times. On your computer, your phone, at work, at home. Ordinary, familiar, unremarkable. And that's exactly why we're talking about it. Because tonight isn't about excitement or drama or anything that requires your attention. Tonight is about something gentle, something predictable, something so ordinary that your mind can simply drift while soft words wash over you like a quiet tide. You don't need to follow every word I say. You don't need to remember anything. You don't need to learn or retain or concentrate. In fact, you have complete permission to fall asleep at any moment, in the next few minutes, or 20 minutes from now, or an hour from now, whenever your body is ready. That's what this is for. Some people will hear the entire story about QWERTY. Others will hear only pieces, fragments, words floating through their consciousness as they drift towards sleep. And some of you will be asleep before we even really begin. All of these are perfect. All of these are exactly right. There's no wrong way to listen to this. I want you to know something important before we continue. Nothing dramatic is going to happen in this video. Nothing loud. Nothing sudden. Nothing that will startle you or demand your attention. There are no plot twists in the story of a keyboard layout. No surprises. No moments where you'll need to stay alert. It's just talking. Gentle. Meandering. Exploring the quiet history and small details of something utterly ordinary. The pace will stay slow. The tone will stay soft. Everything will remain calm and predictable from beginning to end. Think of this like sitting with someone on a quiet evening, and they are telling you about something mildly interesting, something that doesn't require much from you. You can listen, or you can let the words become background. You can pay attention, or you can let your mind wander. You can stay present, or you can slip away into sleep. All of it is fine. All of it is welcome. Your only job tonight is to rest, to let go, to allow yourself to stop trying, stop thinking, stop managing. Your body knows how to sleep. Your mind knows how to let go. You don't have to force anything. You don't have to make anything happen. Just be here, breathing, resting, listening or not listening, however it unfolds for you. The QWERTY keyboard is waiting. Its story is patient. It's been around for over 150 years, and it can wait a little longer while you settle, while you sink deeper into your pillow, while your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to blur and soften. There's nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be, nothing requiring your energy or effort or attention. Just rest. And when you're ready, or even if you're not quite ready yet, we'll begin talking about QWERTY, that arrangement of letters, that familiar pattern your fingers know by heart. We'll explore where it came from, why those letters are in that order, what it means, and all the small, gentle details in between. But there's no rush. Take your time. Breathe. Let your body become heavy. Let your mind become soft. The keyboard will be here. The story will be here. And you can simply rest. That's all this is. That's all this needs to be. So welcome. Thank you for being here. And whenever you're ready to drift away, go ahead. The story of QWERTY begins now. Slow and gentle, just like everything else tonight. Let's start at the beginning. Let's begin our journey tonight with something you probably interact with every single day, maybe even dozens of times a day, and yet you've likely never stopped to think about where it came from, or why it looks the way it does. I'm talking, of course, about the QWERTY keyboard. Take a moment, if you'd like, to picture it in your mind. Those letters arranged in that familiar pattern, QWERTY across the top row. It's so ordinary, isn't it? So unremarkable. You probably don't even look at it anymore when you type. Your fingers just know where to go. The QWERTY keyboard layout is the dominant keyboard layout used throughout the world. When we say dominant, we really mean it. Billions of people use this exact same arrangement of letters every single day. From Tokyo to Toronto, from Mumbai to Melbourne, the same pattern repeats itself on device after device. And here's where things get interesting, in that gentle, curious sort of way. The QWERTY layout wasn't designed for the devices we use today. Not even close. It was originally created for 19th century mechanical typewriters. We're talking about the 1800s here, a time before electricity was common in homes, before automobiles, before airplanes. A completely different world. Those mechanical typewriters were fascinating machines, really. Heavy, sturdy things made of metal and careful engineering. When you pressed a key, a long metal arm called a type bar would swing up and strike an ink ribbon against the paper. You could hear each letter being stamped onto the page. Click-clack, click-clack. Very physical, very mechanical. But here's what's so remarkable. Despite the fact that our technologies have changed radically since then, QWERTY remains the default keyboard layout on virtually everything we use to type. Think about that for a moment. We've gone from those heavy mechanical typewriters to computers, then to laptops that we can carry in a bag, then to smartphones that fit in our pockets and respond to the lightest touch of our fingertips on glass. We have tablets, smart TVs, game controllers with little pop-up keyboards, and even keyboards that appear in virtual reality headsets, floating in digital space. All of these devices use completely different technologies. A smartphone screen has nothing in common with those old metal type bars. A VI keyboard exists only as pixels and light. And yet, QWERTY, always the same arrangement. This persistence is fascinating to researchers and historians. QWERTY has become a frequent case study in why legacy technologies persist long after their original constraints dissipate. It's taught in business schools, discussed in technology courses, analyzed by economists trying to understand how standards emerge and why they are so difficult to change. The constraints that led to QWERTY's creation, they are completely gone now, vanished. Modern keyboards don't have the mechanical problems that QWERTY was designed to solve. And yet here we are, you and I, in 2026, still using a layout from the 1870s. It's one of those quiet mysteries hiding in plain sight. Not dramatic or urgent, just gently curious. The kind of thing that's perfect to ponder as you settle into rest. Why does QWERTY persist? What made it so sticky that it survived more than a century of technological revolution? Why haven't we moved on to something newer? Perhaps something more efficient? These are the questions we're going to explore together tonight. Not with any rush or urgency, but slowly, carefully, like turning the pages of an old book, each fact building on the last, each part of the story revealing something interesting about how we interact with technology, how habits form, and how the past shapes the present in unexpected ways. The story of QWERTY is surprisingly rich. It involves inventors and failures, competitions and chance occurrences, speed typists and telegraph operators, business decisions and human habits. It spans more than 150 years of history, but we have plenty of time. Hours, in fact. So let's not rush. Let's just breathe, settle in, and begin at the beginning. Because before there was QWERTY, there was a problem that needed solving. And understanding that problem is the key to understanding everything that came after. So relax, get comfortable, and let's continue our journey together into the fascinating, unlikely story of the keyboard beneath your fingertips. So let's travel back even further now, back before QWERTY existed at all. back to a time when the very idea of a typewriter was still new and strange and full of possibility. In those early days, inventors were experimenting, trying different approaches, testing various ideas about how to arrange letters on a keyboard. And as with many inventions, the first attempts were, well, they were logical, but they didn't quite work. Early typewriters experimented with alphabetical and piano-style keyboard layouts. And really, when you think about it, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? If you're inventing a new machine and you need to arrange 26 letters on it, what could be more natural than putting them in alphabetical order? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's the way we learn letters as children. It's how dictionaries are organized. It seems like the obvious choice. Some inventors also tried piano-style layouts, arranging the keys in a way that might feel familiar to anyone who'd played a piano. These seemed promising too, elegant, even. But there was a problem, a significant problem. These layouts caused frequent mechanical jams when commonly paired letters were typed quickly. Now, to understand why this happened, you need to picture how those early typewriters actually worked. Remember those type bars we mentioned? Each key was connected to a long metal arm. When you pressed a key, that arm would swing up from its resting position, arc through the air, and strike the paper. The thing is, all of these type bars were arranged in a circular basket underneath the typing point. They all had to swing up to the same spot. And if you typed two letters in quick succession, especially if those letters were next to each other in the mechanism, their type bars could collide with each other before they'd had time to fall back down. Jam. The typist would have to stop, reach into the mechanism, and manually separate the stuck type bars. Frustrating. Time-consuming. The exact opposite of what a typing machine was supposed to accomplish. And here's something wonderful to think about as you relax. We know that people were using these early, imperfect typewriters anyway, testing them, trying them out, seeing what was possible. In 1808, a woman named Carolina Fantoni used one of the earliest typewriters to write letters. This was pre-QWERTY, of course. Long before, she was showing that early experimentation with typing existed long before standard layouts were established. Can you imagine being among the first people to communicate by typing? Each letter pressed deliberately, mechanically transferred to paper. The novelty of it, the strangeness. These early experimenters were pioneers in their own way. They were discovering what worked and what didn't, what felt natural and what felt awkward. They were the ones who revealed the problems that would need solving. And one of those problems was jamming. Constant, persistent jamming. Someone would need to figure out how to fix that. Someone would need to rethink the entire arrangement of letters on the keyboard. That someone was about to arrive on the scene. Let me tell you about Christopher Latham Sholes. Sholes was an American inventor working in the late 1860s. He wasn't the first person to think about typewriters, but he would become one of the most important figures in their development. The man who would, eventually, give us QWERTY. But that's getting ahead of the story, because Christopher Latham Sholes began developing typewriters in the late 1860s, and his first attempts, well, they didn't work either. This is something worth remembering as you drift towards sleep. Even the people who eventually succeed usually fail first. Many times, Sholes would spend years on this problem. His first patented typewriter came in October 1867. And what layout did it use? An alphabetical layout. Not QWERTY. Just like those other inventors, Sholes started with what seemed logical. The alphabet, in order, assigned to keys. It must have seemed like a good idea at the time. Straightforward, easy to learn. Anyone who knew their ABCs could find any letter. But it jammed, just like the others. So Sholes went back to the drawing board. He tried something different. In 1868, Sholes patented a piano-style alphabetical arrangement across 2 rows. Picture it, letters still in alphabetical order, but now spread across 2 rows of keys, perhaps inspired by the white and black keys of a piano keyboard. Again, there's a certain elegance to this idea, a certain logic, but these early designs jammed frequently during fast typing, revealing the need for a new approach. Sholes was discovering what all those other inventors had discovered: alphabetical layouts. No matter how you arranged them, put commonly used letter combinations right next to each other in the mechanism. And that meant jamming. Type the word the and those type bars would crash into each other. Type and all that all within jam, jam, jam. The machine would work fine if you typed slowly, 1 careful letter at a time. But what was the point of that? A typewriter was supposed to be faster than handwriting. If you had to type slowly to avoid jamming, you might as well just use a pen. So Sholes had a challenge in front of him. He needed to invent a layout that would keep commonly paired letters separated in the mechanism, still be learnable and usable for typists, allow for reasonably fast typing without constant jamming. It was a puzzle, a mechanical puzzle with linguistic components, and solving it would take time. Years, actually. But Sholes was persistent. He kept trying, kept testing, kept refining, and eventually, through hundreds of small adjustments and experiments, something new would emerge. Something that would last for more than 150 years. Now we come to the heart of our story, the creation itself. And like many important inventions, it didn't happen all at once. It emerged gradually, through patience and careful attention. Christopher Latham Sholes spent over 5 years refining the keyboard layout through trial and error. 5 years. That's a long time to work on a single problem, isn't it? But think about what he was trying to do. He was trying to find the optimal arrangement of 26 letters, considering mechanical constraints, language patterns, and human finger movement. It's actually quite a complex puzzle when you think about it. And Sholes didn't work alone. He worked with an educator named Amos Densmore, and Densmore brought something crucial to the project. He analyzed common letter pairings in the English language. These are called bigrams in linguistics. 2-letter combinations. Densmore looked at which letters appeared together most frequently. The, in, er, and so on. This was a smart approach. If you know which letters are commonly typed together, you can deliberately separate them on the keyboard. Put them far apart in the mechanism. That way, their type bars won't be anywhere near each other, reducing the chance of jamming. The goal was to reduce mechanical jamming by separating frequently paired letters. So they started rearranging, testing, adjusting. A letter moved here, another moved there. Type some words. See if it jams. Adjust again. In November 1868, Sholes patented a partial reversal of the alphabet, running Z through N from right to left. It's interesting, isn't it? The solution involved breaking away from the alphabetical logic entirely, scrambling things up, making the arrangement seem almost random to anyone who didn't understand the underlying mechanical reasoning. These incremental anti-jamming tweaks gradually evolved into the QWERTY layout. Not all at once. Gradually. Step by step. Each small change building on the last. Each adjustment solving one problem while creating new considerations. It was an evolution, really. A slow refinement towards something that worked. And here's a detail that some historians find fascinating. Some suggest that telegraph operators also influenced the layout to aid Morse code transcription. You see, in those days, telegraph operators would receive messages in Morse code and need to transcribe them quickly onto paper. Some of them started using typewriters for this purpose, and Sholes reportedly consulted with telegraph operators, getting their feedback on what letter arrangements would help them work most efficiently. Whether this influenced the final layout significantly is still debated among historians. But it's a lovely detail, isn't it? The idea that QWERTY might have been shaped partly by the rhythms of Morse code, those dots and dashes traveling across telegraph wires. So many factors contributing to the final design. Mechanical constraints, language patterns, human feedback, years of testing and adjustment, and eventually, Sholes had something that worked, something that reduced jamming enough to make the typewriter practical, something that could be manufactured and sold. He had QWERTY, or at least a version of it. The layout was almost there, almost complete, just a few more refinements. Let's talk about how QWERTY got its name, because it's wonderfully simple, really. The name QWERTY comes from the first 6 letters of the top letter row. Look at the keyboard in your mind. The top row of letters, QWERTY. That's it. That's where the name comes from. It's not an acronym standing for something else. It's not named after a person or a place. It's simply the first 6 letters you encounter when you look at the top row. Straightforward, descriptive, the kind of name that emerges naturally when people need to refer to something. And the keyboard layout evolved into 4 rows, numbers on top and 3 rows of letters. This structure is still with us today, of course. Numbers across the top, then 3 rows of letter keys, then a space bar at the bottom. It's so familiar we don't even think about it anymore. But Sholes had solved his jamming problem. He had a workable design. Now he needed to get it manufactured and sold. He needed a business partner. So Sholes sold his design to E. Remington & Sons. Remington was already a well-established manufacturer. They'd made their name producing firearms, and they had the mechanical expertise and manufacturing capacity to produce typewriters at scale. They saw potential in Sholes's invention, and Remington typewriters popularized QWERTY commercially. This partnership was crucial. An invention is one thing, but getting that invention into people's hands, into offices and homes, making it the standard, that's something else entirely. That requires manufacturing, marketing, distribution. Remington had all of that. The definitive QWERTY arrangement appeared on Remington machines by 1878. By then, the layout had stabilized. The years of experimentation were over. This was it. This was the arrangement that would be sold to the public, taught to typists, spread across the business world. And here's an interesting detail. QWERTY was patented as part of the machine, not as a standalone keyboard layout. The patent covered the typewriter as a whole device, with QWERTY being one component of that invention. No one could have predicted then that this particular arrangement of letters would outlive the mechanical constraints that created it, that it would persist for more than 150 years, spreading to technologies that wouldn't be invented for another century. But that's exactly what happened. Remington typewriters spread. Businesses bought them. Typing schools taught students to use QWERTY. A generation of typists learned where the letters were. Muscle memory formed. Standards emerged. And once millions of people had learned to type on QWERTY, once countless typewriters had been manufactured with that layout, once businesses had invested in training their staff, it became very, very difficult to change. Even when someone invented a better layout, even when the original mechanical constraints vanished, the weight of history, the installed base, the trained fingers of millions of typists, it all kept QWERTY in place. And here we are, all these years later, still typing QWERTY. Isn't that remarkable? Isn't that something to ponder gently as you relax and let your mind settle? The past reaching forward through time, shaping our present in unexpected ways. So QWERTY was out in the world now, being manufactured, being sold, being used in offices and businesses across America and beyond. And something interesting started to happen, something that would determine the course of typing for the next century and a half. By the mid-1870s, QWERTY had become the de facto standard in offices. De facto, that's Latin, meaning in fact or in practice. Not necessarily official, not mandated by law or formal regulation, but simply what everyone was using, the standard that emerged through adoption rather than decree. Offices that bought typewriters bought ones with QWERTY. Typing schools that trained secretaries and clerks trained them on QWERTY. People who learned to type learned where the letters were on a QWERTY keyboard. And once you've learned to type, once your fingers know where to go without thinking, that's a skill you carry with you. Imagine being a secretary in 1880 who'd spent months learning to type on QWERTY. Your fingers flying across the keys, barely looking down. The letters exactly where you expect them to be. And then imagine someone introducing a typewriter with a completely different layout. You'd have to start over, relearn everything. Your trained fingers would keep reaching for where the letters used to be. That's a powerful disincentive to change, isn't it? But it gets even more locked in. Because in 1893, something significant happened. Major manufacturers formed the Union Typewriter Company and agreed to use QWERTY. Let that settle in for a moment. The major typewriter manufacturers, competitors in the marketplace, came together and agreed on a standard. They all committed to producing machines with the same keyboard layout. This agreement locked QWERTY into the market. Now it wasn't just one company selling QWERTY machines. It was all of them. If you wanted to buy a typewriter, it would almost certainly have QWERTY keys. If you wanted to train someone to type, you'd train them on QWERTY because that's what they'd encounter in the workplace. The dominoes had been set up, and now they were falling, one after another, each adoption making the next adoption more likely, each trained typist making it more important for the next machine to be QWERTY compatible. And here's something poignant to consider as you rest. Even Christopher Latham Sholes himself, the inventor of QWERTY, eventually had doubts about his creation. Sholes later patented alternative layouts, including something called XPMCH in 1889, which he believed were more efficient. XPMCH, named the same way as QWERTY, after the first letters in the top row. Sholes thought this new layout was better, more efficient, easier to learn, perhaps better suited to the English language now that he'd had more time to analyze typing patterns. But none of these alternatives displaced QWERTY due to widespread adoption. By 1889, it was already too late. QWERTY had been the standard for over a decade. Thousands of typists had been trained. Thousands of machines had been sold. The momentum was too great. Even the original inventor couldn't change course. Can you imagine that? Creating something, then realizing you could improve it, but being unable to implement your improvements because your earlier version had become too successful? It's almost tragic in a way, but also very human, very real. Years later, economists studying this phenomenon would give it a name. Economists described this as path dependence. Path dependence. It's a beautiful term, really. It means that the choices available to us now are constrained by decisions made in the past. That history matters, that we're on a path, and even if we can see a better path over there, switching paths has costs. Sometimes those costs are too high. QWERTY is perhaps the most famous example of path dependence in technology. It's taught in economics classes as a cautionary tale or an interesting case study, depending on your perspective. Because here's what had happened. Network effects had emerged. Network effects, training, hardware, and institutional adoption made switching layouts costly. Let's unpack that gently, because it's fascinating when you really think about it. Training. Millions of people had learned QWERTY. They had muscle memory. They could type without looking. Switching to a new layout meant retraining all of them. That's millions of hours of lost productivity. Millions of people stumbling over unfamiliar keyboards, making mistakes, typing slowly while they relearned. Hardware. Factories were set up to produce QWERTY keyboards. Molds had been made. Supply chains established. Inventory accumulated. Switching meant retooling factories, which costs money. Creating new molds, which costs money. Disposing of existing inventory, which costs money. Institutional adoption. Businesses had standardized on QWERTY. Typing schools taught QWERTY. Textbooks illustrated QWERTY. Job postings required QWERTY typing skills. The entire infrastructure of office work had been built around this one layout. To change all of that at once would require coordination on a massive scale. Everyone would need to switch at the same time, or else you'd have a confusing mess where some people typed one way and some typed another, where some machines had one layout and some had another. It's the kind of coordination problem that's extremely difficult to solve. Not impossible, but difficult, expensive, disruptive, and so QWERTY stayed. Not because it was necessarily the best layout, though that's debated even now, but because it was already there, already established, already woven into the fabric of how work got done. The past had created the present. The choices of the 1870s were determining the options of the 1890s, and the 1920s, and the 1950s, and all the way down to today. Path dependence. We're still on that path, still following the route laid down more than 150 years ago by Christopher Latham Scholes and Amos Densmore, by E. Remington and Sons, by that 1893 agreement among typewriter manufacturers. Your fingers, when you type, are moving in patterns established in the 19th century, following grooves worn by millions and millions of typists before you. There's something almost comforting about that, isn't there? This continuity, this connection across time. Every time you type, you're part of a tradition, part of a path that stretches back through decades and generations. And that path continues forward, even as technologies change completely, even as the mechanical constraints that created QWERTY vanish into history. The path continues, and we continue along it, typing QWERTY, just as typists did in 1878, in 1920, in 1965, in 2000, just as you do now. Now we need to talk about something important, something that often gets overlooked in the story of QWERTY, but which is absolutely essential to understanding how it spread so widely and became so deeply embedded in society. We need to talk about women. Because QWERTY's spread coincided with women entering clerical work in large numbers. This wasn't a coincidence. These two changes were deeply intertwined, each one enabling and reinforcing the other. The typewriter created opportunities for women, and women, in turn, made the typewriter indispensable to business. Let's think about what work was like for women in the 1880s. The options were limited. Teaching, perhaps. Nursing, domestic service, factory work, which was often grueling and poorly paid. For middle-class women especially, the range of respectable employment was narrow. And then came the typewriter. In 1881, the YWCA launched the first typing classes for women using QWERTY, the Young Women's Christian Association, an organization dedicated to helping women find safe housing and respectable employment. They saw the potential immediately. Here was a new profession, clean office work, better paid than many alternatives, and it required a learnable skill rather than years of apprenticeship. So they taught women to type on QWERTY keyboards. And the following year, something else important happened. In 1882, Elizabeth Margaret Vatter Longley published the all-finger and eight-finger touch typing methods based on QWERTY. Before Longley, many people typed by hunting and pecking, looking at the keyboard, finding each letter, pressing it with one or two fingers. Slow, inefficient. But Longley developed methods for touch typing, using all your fingers, or at least 8 of them, resting your fingers on the home row. You know, where your index fingers rest on F and J, those little bumps that help you find your place, reaching for other letters without looking down, letting muscle memory do the work. This was transformative. Touch typing made professional typists dramatically faster than handwriting. It made them valuable to businesses. It made typing a genuine career, not just a novelty, and Elizabeth Margaret Vatter Longley published these methods specifically for QWERTY. The finger positions, the techniques, the exercises, all designed around that particular arrangement of letters. So now QWERTY wasn't just a keyboard layout. It was part of a system, a method, a teachable skill with standardized techniques. And there was marketing happening too, because the typewriter companies understood that they needed to make typing seem respectable and appealing to women. Lillian Sholes, the inventor's daughter, modeled for early QWERTY typewriter advertisements at age 15. Lillian Sholes, Christopher Latham Sholes' own daughter, a young woman positioned at a typewriter, demonstrating that this was appropriate work for respectable young ladies. That typing was feminine, modern, forward-thinking. Remington ads portrayed the typewriter girl as modern and independent. The typewriter girl. That's what they called her. Young, fashionable, capable. Sitting at her machine in a clean office, producing perfect documents. Earning her own money. Not dependent on a husband or father for support. The advertisements were aspirational. They suggested that learning to type on a QWERTY keyboard could transform a woman's life, could give her independence and respectability and a place in the modern business world. And women responded, in enormous numbers. By 1891, over 75,000 of the 100,000 professional typists in the U.S. were women. Think about that ratio. 3/4. In just over a decade, typing had become a predominantly female profession. A profession that barely existed before 1880 now employed 75,000 women. And the trend continued. By 1900, women made up roughly 75% of U.S. clerical workers. The office had been transformed. What had once been an all-male domain of clerks carefully writing in ledgers had become a mixed workplace, with women operating typewriters, filing documents, managing correspondence. And these women trained other women. Women opened typing pools to train others quickly for office jobs. Typing pools. Rooms full of women at typewriters, all learning together, practicing their finger positions, building their speed, preparing for employment. Some of these were formal business schools. Some were smaller operations run by experienced typists who saw an opportunity to teach their skills to others. But all of them were teaching QWERTY, because that's what offices used. That's what employers expected. The standardization was reinforcing itself. Women learned QWERTY because offices used QWERTY. Offices used QWERTY because that's what trained typists knew. Round and round, each cycle making the standard stronger. And this wasn't just an American phenomenon. By 1901, 99% of typists in Scotland were women using QWERTY machines. 99%. Nearly universal. In Scotland, across the Atlantic, the same pattern had emerged. Typewriting had become women's work. QWERTY had become the standard. The two were inseparable. And for many women, this represented something profound. Typing offered women economic independence beyond teaching or nursing. Economic independence. The ability to support yourself. To make your own decisions. To delay marriage if you chose. Or to remain unmarried. Or to contribute to your household's income. This mattered enormously in an era when women's options were so constrained. When marriage often meant giving up work entirely. When women had limited legal and financial rights. A woman who could type at 60 words per minute on a QWERTY keyboard had a marketable skill. She could find employment in cities across the country, across the world. She could negotiate for better wages. She could move from one firm to another. She had options. And so typing became not just a job, but a pathway to a different kind of life. A modern life. An independent life. The typewriter manufacturers understood this. The typing schools understood this. And most importantly, the women themselves understood this. They flocked to typing classes. They practiced until their fingers flew across the keys. They memorized the QWERTY layout until they could type without thinking, without looking, as naturally as writing by hand. They became the backbone of modern office work. They made businesses run more efficiently. They created and managed the paper flow that kept early 20th century organizations functioning. And every single one of them learned QWERTY. Every finger position, every reach for a distant letter, every exercise building speed and accuracy, all calibrated to that one layout. Millions of women, millions of trained fingers, all following the same patterns. This was network effects in human form. This was path dependence embodied in muscle memory and career choices and institutional structures. QWERTY wasn't just a keyboard layout anymore. It was woven into the fabric of how women entered the workforce, how offices functioned, how modernity itself was understood and experienced. And once that happened, once typing became inseparable from women's employment, once entire industries depended on this trained workforce, how could it ever change? The layout was locked in not just by manufacturing agreements or installed hardware, but by millions of human lives, by careers and skills and identities, by the typewriter girls, modern and independent, their fingers dancing across QWERTY keys, creating the future, one keystroke at a time. So QWERTY had spread through the business world, through offices and typing pools and clerical work, through the hands and fingers of hundreds of thousands of women who'd made it their profession. But for something to become truly permanent, truly unshakable, it needs to enter the educational system. It needs to be taught to children. And that's exactly what happened. Schools incorporated QWERTY typing into formal curricula. Think about what this means. Typing wasn't just a skill you learned if you wanted a particular kind of job. It was becoming part of education itself, part of what it meant to be educated, part of the standard knowledge base that schools were responsible for imparting. By 1916, U.S. girls' schools taught QWERTY as a core commercial skill. Girls' schools, because remember, typing was understood as primarily women's work. So girls learned typing the way boys might learn bookkeeping or mechanical drawing. It was preparation for their future, for the work they might do, for the lives they might lead. And they learned QWERTY, not because anyone sat down and decided QWERTY was the optimal layout for education, but because QWERTY was what offices used, what businesses expected, what the textbooks illustrated, what the typing teachers themselves had learned. It was the standard, so it was what got taught. And this happened not just in America. Educational systems worldwide standardized typing instruction around QWERTY. Worldwide, from Britain to Australia, from Canada to South Africa, anywhere English was typed, schools taught QWERTY. The layout spread with the language, with commerce, with the expansion of office work as a global phenomenon. And once something enters the educational system, it becomes extraordinarily difficult to change. This institutional inertia further discouraged switching to alternative layouts. Institutional inertia, that's a useful phrase. It means that institutions, schools, businesses, governments, resist change because change is difficult and expensive and disruptive. If you want to change what layout is taught in schools, you need to retrain all the typing teachers, replace all the textbooks, replace or relabel all the typewriters and keyboards, accept that there will be a transition period where different people know different layouts, convince parents and school boards that the change is worth the disruption and expense. That's a lot of obstacles, a lot of resistance. So schools kept teaching QWERTY, because QWERTY was what they'd always taught, because changing would be hard, because the current system worked, even if it wasn't perfect. And every year, a new generation of students learned QWERTY, practiced their finger positions on the home row, built up their typing speed, carried that skill with them into their adult lives. The path was getting deeper, the groove was getting harder to climb out of, and then came a moment that really tested whether change was possible. Even during World War II, Attempts to red-rain typists on Dvorak were abandoned due to QWERTY familiarity. This is worth pausing on, because World War II was a time of enormous change and urgency. The government was mobilizing every resource. Efficiency mattered tremendously. Anything that could speed up communication, reduce errors, improve productivity, that was worth pursuing, and there was an alternative layout available. The Dvorak Simplified Keyboard, invented by August Dvorak in 1936. Dvorak claimed his layout was more efficient, faster to learn, easier on the hands and fingers. During the war, there were actual attempts to red-rain military typists on this new layout. Real experiments with real resources behind them, and they were abandoned, not because Dvorak didn't work, but because the typists already knew QWERTY. Their fingers already knew where the letters were. Retraining them took time and effort and resulted in a period where they typed more slowly, made more mistakes, and that cost, that temporary loss of productivity during retraining, was too high, even in wartime, even with potential long-term benefits. So they stuck with QWERTY. If QWERTY couldn't be displaced during World War II, when efficiency was literally a matter of life and death, when governments had enormous power to mandate change, when could it ever be displaced? The answer, increasingly, seemed to be never. QWERTY had reached a point of entrenchment that went beyond mere convenience or habit. It was embedded in institutions, in education, in training systems, in the muscle memory of millions and millions of people across multiple generations. It was part of the infrastructure of modern life, as fundamental and unchangeable as the gauge of railroad tracks or the direction of traffic flow. You could design something better, maybe. You could prove it was more efficient, perhaps, but you couldn't make millions of people unlearn what they already knew. You couldn't red-rain every teacher and replace every textbook and convince every school board and overcome decades of institutional momentum. The path was set. The grooves were too deep. And so students kept learning QWERTY. Teachers kept teaching it. Schools kept standardizing around it. Year after year, decade after decade, from 1916 to 1936 to 1956 to 1976 to 1996 to 2016 and beyond. Generation after generation, learning the same letter positions, the same finger movements, the same muscle memory, all of them following the path laid down in the 1870s, all of them typing QWERTY. And so we arrive at the present day, or nearly so. We've traveled through 150 years of history, from mechanical typewriters to computers to smartphones, from Christopher Latham Scholes working in his workshop to billions of people carrying keyboards in their pockets. And what layout are we using? Today, QWERTY is the primary layout taught to new typists. Still, even now, in 2026, if you take a typing class, if you learn keyboarding in school, if you download a typing tutor app, you'll learn QWERTY. It has survived the complete transformation of the technology it was designed for. It has outlived mechanical type bars by half a century. It has adapted to touchscreens and virtual keyboards and haptic feedback. It has become, in some sense, timeless, or at least, much more enduring than anyone in the 1870s could possibly have imagined. But QWERTY hasn't remained completely static. As it spread around the world, it adapted slightly to different languages and needs. Many countries use international QWERTY variants with added symbols. International QWERTY. The basic arrangement is the same, QWERTY across the top letter row. But there might be additional keys for currency symbols, or diacritical marks, or other characters needed for international communication. The core remains. The adaptations happen at the edges, and some regions made more substantial modifications for their languages. German-speaking regions use QWERTZ, swapping Y and Z. QWERTZ, not QWERTY, because in German, the letter Z is used much more frequently than Y. So German typewriter manufacturers swapped their positions, putting Z where it would be easier to reach. It's a small change, really, just 2 letters. But it shows that even within the QWERTY paradigm, there was some room for optimization based on linguistic needs. French-speaking regions use AZERTY, a regional adaptation of the same lineage. AZERTY. The top row starts with AZERTY. More letters swapped around. Different positions. Optimized for French letter frequencies and common combinations. But notice, despite differences, these layouts still derive from QWERTY's original design. They are branches from the same tree. Variations on the same theme. The core principles remain. A keyboard with letter keys arranged to reduce jamming on mechanical typewriters that no longer exist. QWERTY and AZERTY show us something interesting. They prove that the layout could be modified, that regional variations were possible, that there was some flexibility in the system. But they also show the power of the original standard, because these variants didn't depart dramatically from QWERTY. They didn't start fresh with a completely different arrangement. They stayed close to the original. Why? Because by the time these regional variants were being established, QWERTY was already dominant. People who learn typing in one language might need to type in another. Businesses operated across borders. Typewriter manufacturers wanted to minimize the number of different models they produced. So the variants stayed similar. Similar enough that someone who learned QWERTY could adapt to QWERTY without too much difficulty. Similar enough that the muscle memory transferred. Mostly, the path dependence was still there. The gravitational pull of the original standard was still strong. And as computers arrived, as keyboards became electronic rather than mechanical, these regional variants persisted. Windows and Mac and Linux all support QWERTY and QWERTY and AZERTY. Your smartphone can switch between them. The layouts that emerged from 19th century mechanical constraints are still with us in the 21st century, on devices that would seem like pure magic to Christopher Latham Scholes. He couldn't have imagined a smartphone. A thin rectangle of glass and metal that fits in your pocket. No moving parts. No type bars or ink ribbons. Just light and electricity and millions of transistors. And yet, when you type on it, the letters appear in the same arrangement he designed. QWERTY, or QWERTZ, or AZERTY. Variations on his theme. His solution to a problem that no longer exists. Persisting because, well, because it persists. Because millions of people learned it. Because it became the standard. Because changing it would be too difficult, too expensive, too disruptive. Because the path was set, and we're still walking it. And there's something almost beautiful about that, in a way. This continuity across generations and technologies. This thread connecting the 1870s to the 2020s. Every time you type, you're participating in that continuity. You're following in the footsteps of millions of typists before you. Victorian secretaries and World War II clerks and 1980s word processors and everyone in between. All of you, across time, typing the same way. Your fingers moving in patterns that have been repeated billions and billions of times. QWERTY. The same today as it was 150 years ago. The same tomorrow as it is today. Enduring. Persistent. Unchanged by the revolutions happening all around it. A small constant in a changing world. A familiar pattern to rest your fingers on. Now, as you continue to relax, let's consider something that people have been thinking about for decades. A question that emerges naturally once you understand QWERTY's history. If QWERTY was designed to solve a problem that no longer exists, is it actually a good keyboard layout? This is where ergonomics advocates come in. And they have concerns. Ergonomics advocates criticize QWERTY for inefficient finger travel. Inefficient finger travel. What does that mean? Well, think about typing for a moment. Really picture it in your mind. Your fingers resting on the home row, and then reaching up for a T or a Y, stretching down for a V or a B. Your pinky finger reaching all the way across for a P. Some letters are easy to reach. They are right there under your fingers, or just one row away. But other letters require your fingers to travel quite far, to stretch in awkward ways, to move off the home row and then return. And ergonomics researchers have pointed out that QWERTY places some very common letters in positions that require a lot of finger travel. Letters you use constantly, like E, N, A, and T, are scattered around the keyboard in ways that make your fingers work harder than they might need to. Over time, over thousands and thousands of keystrokes, this adds up. It can lead to fatigue, strain, in some cases, repetitive stress injuries. So people started thinking, could we design a better layout? One that minimized finger travel, one that was more comfortable, more efficient, easier on your hands and wrists? And the answer was yes, several times over. Actually, alternatives like Dvorak and Kolmak were designed to improve comfort and efficiency. Dvorak, which we mentioned briefly before, designed by August Dvorak in 1936. He analyzed English letter frequencies and common combinations and created a layout where the most common letters sat right on the home row, where your fingers barely had to move for typical English typing. And then later, Kolmak, designed in 2006 by Shai Coleman, a more recent attempt, taking advantage of modern computing and linguistic analysis. Kolmak kept some QWERTY keys in the same positions to make the transition easier, but rearranged others for better efficiency. Both of these layouts can be proven to reduce finger travel. Studies show they can increase typing speed for skilled users. They are measurably better in various ways. So surely these alternatives have taken over by now. Surely everyone has switched to these superior layouts. Well, no. Despite measurable benefits, these layouts remain niche. Niche, a small corner of the typing world. Enthusiasts and ergonomics-conscious programmers and people dealing with repetitive strain injuries who are willing to invest the time to relearn. But the vast majority of typists still using QWERTY, and we've talked about why, haven't we? Throughout this entire story, we've been building toward this answer. QWERTY's dominance persists due to retraining and compatibility costs. Retraining costs. If you're a skilled QWERTY typist, and billions of people are, switching to Dvorak or Kolmak means starting over, typing slowly again, making constant mistakes as your fingers reach for where the letters used to be. Weeks or months of reduced productivity while you build new muscle memory. That's asking a lot, for benefits that might not even materialize for you personally. Some people find the alternatives more comfortable, others don't notice much difference. Some people type faster after switching, others don't. Why go through the pain of retraining if you're not sure it will help? And then there's compatibility. In a world where everyone uses QWERTY, using something else creates friction. Sit down at someone else's computer, and the letters aren't where you expect them. Use a computer at the library or hotel business center, and you're back to hunting and pecking. Try to teach someone how to do something on your computer, and they can't find the keys. Some operating systems and devices don't support alternative layouts easily. You might need to install special software, or change settings, or carry a custom keyboard with you. It's possible, certainly. People do it. But it takes commitment. It takes a willingness to be different, to work against the standard, to swim upstream. And most people, well, most people just want to type. They don't want to think about their keyboard layout. They want to use whatever is standard, whatever they learned in school, whatever everyone else uses. They want to follow the path. And so QWERTY persists. Even though we can measure its inefficiencies, even though we've designed better alternatives, even though the original mechanical constraints disappeared decades ago, it persists because changing is hard, because the costs are real and immediate, while the benefits are uncertain and long-term, because millions of people learned it, and millions more continue to learn it, and the network effects keep growing stronger. And so the ergonomics advocates keep advocating. They publish their studies. They design new layouts. They write blog posts and create typing tutors and try to spread the word. And a few people switch. A small percentage. Enough to keep the alternatives alive, but not enough to challenge QWERTY's dominance. The path remains. Deep and well-worn and easy to follow. Even if there might be better paths nearby. Even if we can see them, point to them, measure their advantages, the old path still calls to us, still feels safer, still feels like the obvious choice, and so we stay on it, typing QWERTY, our fingers traveling inefficiently, perhaps, but traveling along routes they know by heart, routes learned long ago and never forgotten, routes that feel like home. Now let's notice something about QWERTY that you probably never thought about. Something about the balance of the keyboard. Or rather, the imbalance. QWERTY divides letters unevenly between hands. Unevenly. If you picture a keyboard, you might imagine it's fairly balanced. Each hand responsible for about half the letters. But that's not quite true. Count the letters your left hand types in the standard finger position. A, S, D, F, G, and then the upper row, Q, W, E, I, T, and the lower row, Z, X, C, V, B. Now count the right-hand letters, H, J, K, L, semicolon, upper row, Y, U, I, O, P, lower row, N, M, comma, period. Just from counting, you can start to see it. The left hand has more letters assigned to it. But it's not just about how many letters. It's about how often those letters get used. The left hand types more letters overall. When you're typing normal English text, sentences, paragraphs, documents, messages, your left hand is working harder than your right hand, pressing more keys, traveling more distance. In English, about 56 to 60% of keystrokes are made with the left hand. 56 to 60%. That's noticeably uneven. For every 10 keystrokes, your left hand makes 6, and your right hand makes only 4. Why? Well, it comes back to how QWERTY was designed. Remember, it was created to separate commonly paired letters to prevent jamming. The designers were thinking about mechanical constraints, not about balanced workload between hands. So common letters ended up wherever they ended up based on anti-jamming logic. And it happened that more high-frequency letters ended up on the left side. A, S, D, F, E, W, R, T, all on the left side. All common letters. All letters you use constantly in English. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Some people are left-handed and might actually prefer having their dominant hand do more work. And the imbalance isn't so extreme that it causes obvious problems for most people. But it's interesting, isn't it? This asymmetry, this uneven distribution. The right hand has fewer letters but includes high-frequency keys like L and N. L and N, both fairly common in English. The right hand isn't idle. It still has work to do, but it's doing less work overall. Your right hand types words like only and link and learn. It contributes, but your left hand is typing date and fast and create and start and water and after. The left hand gets more of the common English words, more of the heavy lifting, and you probably never noticed this consciously, because your fingers just go where they've learned to go. You don't think about which hand is working harder. You just type. But your left hand is traveling more, moving more, doing more keystrokes. If QWERTY were being designed today, with ergonomics in mind, you'd probably want a more balanced distribution. Split the workload more evenly between hands. Give each hand roughly 50% of the keystroke load. Some alternative layouts, like Dvorak, actually do this intentionally. Dvorak places common letters on the home row and distributes them more evenly between the hands. It aims for better balance, better rhythm, less fatigue. But QWERTY wasn't designed with that goal. It couldn't be, because in the 1870s, ergonomics wasn't really a concept yet. Repetitive strain injury from typing wasn't a concern because typing was so new. The goal was just, don't jam. Separate the common letter pairs. Make the machine work reliably. And so we ended up with an uneven keyboard, with your left hand doing 56 to 60% of the work, with asymmetry built into every sentence you type. And yet, it works, doesn't it? Billions of people type on QWERTY every day without thinking about this imbalance, without feeling that their left hand is overburdened. We adapt. Our bodies learn the pattern, uneven as it is. Our muscle memory compensates. We become proficient despite the quirks and inefficiencies. That's something remarkable about humans, really. Our ability to adapt to imperfect systems, to learn unusual patterns, to make them feel natural through sheer repetition and practice. QWERTY is uneven, but it's our uneven keyboard, the one we learned, the one we know, and knowing it's uneven doesn't really change anything. Your left hand will keep doing more work. Your fingers will keep following the same paths they always have. The pattern persists. The asymmetry continues. And you keep typing. Keep following the groove worn by a billion hands before yours. Left hand busy, right hand less so, but both working together to form words and sentences and thoughts. Typing your way through the modern world on a keyboard designed for a machine that no longer exists. Carrying history in your fingertips. Uneven, yes. Imperfect, perhaps. But familiar. Known. Home. QWERTY. Always QWERTY. Now, as we near the end of our journey, let me share something with you that might surprise you. Something discovered only recently. Something that suggests QWERTY has influenced us in ways far more subtle than anyone imagined. Psycholinguistic research has identified the QWERTY effect. The QWERTY effect, a phenomenon that researchers stumbled upon while studying language and emotion. A strange little quirk in how we respond to words. And here's what they found. Words typed with more right-hand letters tend to be rated as more positive. More positive. Not dramatically so. Not obviously. But measurably, statistically, consistently. When researchers show people lists of words and ask them to rate how positive or negative those words feel, words with more right-hand letters, letters like Y, U, I, O, P, L, N, M, tend to get slightly higher positivity ratings than words with more left-hand letters. Take a moment to let that sink in. The physical arrangement of letters on a keyboard, a layout designed to prevent mechanical jamming in the 1870s, might be influencing how we feel about words themselves. And this isn't just an English phenomenon. The effect appears in multiple languages using QWERTY, including English, Spanish, and Dutch. Different languages, different word patterns, different frequencies of letter usage, but the same underlying effect. Words with more right-hand letters feel slightly more positive. Researchers have tested this extensively, and they've found some interesting nuances. It is strongest for new or invented words. New words. Words that don't have strong existing associations. Made-up words, brand names, neologisms. For these words, the QWERTY effect is most pronounced. For older, familiar words, words like love or hate that have deep emotional associations built up over a lifetime, the effect is weaker or absent. The existing meanings overwhelm any subtle influence from typing. But for new words, words you're encountering for the first time, the keyboard layout might actually be shaping your initial impression. So why does this happen? What's the mechanism? One explanation is motor fluency. Fluent actions feel more positive. Motor fluency. This is a principle from psychology. When something is easy and smooth to do, we tend to like it more. When movements flow naturally, when actions feel effortless, we experience subtle positive feelings. And remember what we learned earlier. The right hand does less work on a QWERTY keyboard. It types fewer letters overall. So when you type a word with mostly right-hand letters, your right hand gets to do more, and your harder working left hand gets a bit of a break. The typing feels more balanced, more fluent, and that fluency, that ease, creates a tiny positive feeling that gets associated with the word itself. At least, that's one theory. Motor fluency creating emotional responses. But here's where it gets even stranger. The effect can occur even when people only read words, not type them. Even when just reading, not typing, just looking at words on a screen or on paper. How can that be? Well, researchers think it's because if you're a skilled typist, reading a word might automatically activate the motor patterns you'd use to type it. Your brain simulates the typing movement, even if you're not actually moving your fingers. And if that simulated typing feels fluent, if it's a right-hand heavy word, you get that subtle positive feeling even without actually typing. It's as if QWERTY has become embedded not just in your muscle memory, but in how your brain processes written language itself. And people in marketing and branding have started to take notice. Researchers have explored its influence on product names, book titles, and movies. Product names. If you're naming a new brand, a new product, something people haven't encountered before, choosing a name with more right-hand letters might make it feel slightly more appealing. Book titles, movie titles, band names. Anywhere a new word or phrase is being introduced and first impressions matter. Researchers have found correlations. Products with more right-hand letters in their names sometimes perform slightly better. Words with right-hand bias appear slightly more often in successful titles. But, and this is important to remember as you relax, the effect is subtle and statistical, not a guarantee of success. Subtle, statistical, not magic, not a formula for guaranteed popularity. A great product with a left-hand heavy name will still succeed. A terrible product with a right-hand heavy name will still fail. Content matters. Quality matters. Marketing matters. The QWERTY effect is just one tiny influence among thousands. A gentle thumb on the scale. A whisper in a crowded room. But it's there. Measurable. Real. And it's astonishing when you think about it. A keyboard layout designed to solve a mechanical problem in typewriters has, over decades of use, actually begun to influence human psychology. We've typed so much on QWERTY keyboards that the layout has worked its way into how we think about language, how we feel about words, how we respond to new names and titles. The medium has shaped the message. The tool has shaped the user. And most of us never noticed, never realized that our fingers' relationship with the keyboard might be coloring our relationship with words themselves. It's one more way that QWERTY has become embedded in human culture, not just as a standard, not just as a learned skill, but as something deeper, something that touches how we perceive and feel and respond. A 150-year-old solution to a mechanical problem, influencing book titles in the 21st century, influencing brand names, product launches, maybe even influencing which words feel friendly and which feel harsh, all because Christopher Latham Scholes arranged some letters in a particular way to prevent type bars from jamming. The ripples spreading out through time, through culture, through psychology, in ways no one could have predicted or planned. The QWERTY effect. Subtle, strange, and surprisingly real. One more chapter in the unlikely story of the keyboard beneath your fingers. And so we arrive at the end of our journey together, from the 1860s to today, from mechanical typewriters to touchscreens, from Christopher Latham Scholes' workshop to the billions of keyboards in use around the world right now. We've followed the path of QWERTY through history, through business and education, through women's employment and institutional inertia, through attempts to change it and reasons it persisted. And now, as you settle deeper into relaxation, as your mind drifts and softens, let's consider what it all means. What is the final takeaway from this long, winding story? QWERTY survives not because it is optimal, but because society adapted around it. Not because it's optimal, not because it's the best possible keyboard layout, not because some careful analysis determined it was perfect, but because society adapted, because millions of people learned it, because businesses standardized on it, because schools taught it, because the entire infrastructure of typing was built around this one particular arrangement of letters. And once society had adapted that far, changing became nearly impossible. Think about what QWERTY really is. A layout designed to prevent metal arms from colliding now shapes modern communication. Metal arms, type bars, physical mechanical constraints from the 1870s. And those constraints are gone. Completely gone. Your smartphone has no moving parts. Your laptop keyboard uses rubber domes or scissor switches or mechanical switches, but not type bars. The problem QWERTY was designed to solve hasn't existed for decades. And yet QWERTY remains. On every device, in every language, across every platform, shaping how you send emails, how you write documents, how you text your friends, how you search the internet, how you express yourself through typed words. A solution to a problem that no longer exists, continuing to influence billions of daily interactions. It's almost poetic, in a way. The past reaching forward, the dead hand of history still guiding the living, not through force, but through sheer momentum, through the accumulated weight of habit and training and infrastructure. And QWERTY remains one of the clearest examples of how early design decisions can echo for centuries. Centuries, not years, not decades, centuries. Christopher Latham Scholes made decisions in the 1870s that are still affecting your life in 2026. His choices, his compromises, his trial and error experimentation, all of it still present in your daily experience. Every time you type, every time your fingers find the keys without looking, every time you send a message or write a document or search for information, you're following patterns established 150 years ago, and you'll likely follow those same patterns for the rest of your life. Your children will probably learn QWERTY too. Maybe your grandchildren. The path continues forward, deeper and more worn with each passing year. This is the nature of standards, of infrastructure, of path dependence. Once something becomes established enough, once enough people learn it and adapt to it and build around it, it becomes almost permanent, almost unchangeable. Not because it can't technically be changed. We could all switch to Dvorak tomorrow if we collectively decided to. The technology is there. The alternative layouts exist. But because coordinating that change would be so difficult, so expensive, so disruptive, because the benefits are uncertain while the costs are guaranteed, because most people, when faced with that choice, decide to stick with what they know, to follow the path, to type QWERTY, and so QWERTY persists, an artifact from the age of mechanical typewriters, alive and thriving in the age of artificial intelligence and virtual reality. A reminder that the present is always shaped by the past. That history doesn't just inform our world, it constrains it, channels it, directs it in ways both visible and invisible. QWERTY is visible, if you look for it, right there under your fingertips. The letters arranged just so. QWERTY. But its influence is invisible. The trained pathways in your brain, the muscle memory in your fingers, the subtle positive feelings for right-hand words, the institutional structures built around this one layout, all of it invisible, all of it powerful, all of it continuing, day after day, keystroke after keystroke. The typewriter girls of the 1890s typing the same patterns as the office workers of 2026. Christopher Latham Scholl's separated letters to prevent jamming, and you, right now, in this moment, still feel the effects of that decision whenever you type. The past and present connected, linked across time by something as simple as a keyboard layout. And there's something comforting about that, isn't there? As you drift towards sleep, as your thoughts slow and soften, this continuity, this connection, this thread running through history, you're part of something larger than yourself, part of a tradition, part of a pattern that began long before you were born and will continue long after. Every time you type, you join that tradition. You become part of the story of QWERTY, the story of how a solution to a 19th century mechanical problem became a permanent feature of human communication, the story of path dependence, of standards and network effects, of how the past shapes the present in ways both obvious and subtle, the story we've shared together tonight. And now, as this story ends, as your journey through QWERTY's history concludes, let yourself rest, let your mind settle, let the patterns fade into the background. QWERTY, always there, always familiar, the keyboard beneath your fingertips, the layout in your muscle memory, constant, unchanging, reliable, like the rhythm of breathing, like the beating of your heart, present but not noticed, there but not demanding attention, just there, always there. QWERTY, guiding your fingers, shaping your words, as you drift, and settle, and sleep.